Welcome into the Skinny Podcast. It's the Potpourri edition. I'm Richard Skinner, Local12.com digital sports columnist and editor with Rick Broering. As always, it's presented by Blake, the attorney Maislin. We got a lot to discuss. We got Bengals, we got Hard Knocks, we got college basketball, ick at the moment. We got college football with the conference championship games.
Also,
so much more. Yeah, also ick at the moment, yes. And of course, my favorite portion of the podcast, you can ask me a question on any topic. If you go to the Xverse, hit up the hashtag AskSkinnyAnything. It does not have to be a sports-related topic. It can be on anything, and I'll do my best to answer it. Rick, you're just freshly back from Akron, where NKU took it on the chin. You look well-rested for a guy that got in the wee hours of the morning. Did you get a good night's sleep, I'm assuming?
No, not really. We got a little snafu with the kid this morning, so I was up and at him early around 7. But that's neither here nor there, Skinny. I'm more interested in the fact that you mentioned Hard Knocks. Did you watch the first episode of Hard Knocks?
So last night, Kelsey Conway and I went to the Mike Petraglia estate to watch the Villanova UC game. She's a UC grad. Mike's a Villanova grad. Had some pizza and wings and beer. And I wasn't planning on staying. And then I realized, actually, Kelsey said, she goes, I said, I think I'm going to leave. She goes, you're not going to stay for Hard Knocks? I go, okay, I'll stay here and watch it. So we watched that. I don't know if I'm going to watch many more, but I watched it.
Yeah, that surprised me because last time we had talked about this, you were completely uninterested. But first of all, it sounds like a great night of watching college hoops and hanging out with a few of your fellow beat writers. But okay, here's my initial thought. I watched the first episode, and everyone acts like every time a new episode of Hard Knocks come out, Scorsese just released his best film ever. And
they do a nice job. I will say they do a nice job.
They do a nice job, but I was pretty underwhelmed with this episode. I didn't think it was that interesting or compelling. I mean, it's always well shot, but I mean, there's not that much going on. It's just like a week of preparation before a game for all these teams. I didn't think there was anything that was too earth-shattering or insightful or interesting about watching this. I did think they really underlined some stereotypes that I think fan bases have formed, or at least maybe I have formed. First being, Mike Tomlin is awesome. I mean, he came across as very awesome, and it felt like they went out of their way to show you how cool and authoritative he is.
He was the star of the show.
Definitely. Russell Wilson is corny, and they even showed moments of the huddle where, like, one of his teammates was making fun of him. I love when you're about to tell us the play, and then you go into a motivational speech instead, and they were, like, ragging on him. That was awesome. That was a great part of this show because that's what everyone nationally thinks about Russell Wilson. And then you get to the Bengals, and Skinny, I have to tell you, I just kind of I've always had this thought about Zach Taylor, and it was just reemphasized watching this. He gives you that Andy Dalton quality where you feel he's trying his hardest. He's doing everything right. He's saying all the right things. There's nothing really wrong with what he's doing, but there's just something about him that makes it hard to buy in.
Well, I think the problem right now is the message has gotten stale. I think he believes in the message very much.
But just the sound of him, right? Like the way he comes off.
Yeah, and we talked about that amongst ourselves. I actually just did a segment with Tony Pike on Cincy 360, and that kind of got brought up. And I said, and Austin Elmore, his co-host and producer, I heard his take earlier before I came on about that, and I kind of had the same thing. You just are what you are personality-wise, and you just have to be true to yourself. I mean, I don't need Mike Tomlin to be Tony Dungy. But, let's not forget, John Wooden won a lot of national championships not raising his voice very much. Now, granted, he had some pretty doggone good players to do that with. Tony Dungy won a Super Bowl being very soft-spoken. But at the same time, I don't expect Dan Hurley to suddenly flip his personality from madman to, I'm just going to be quiet on the side. It's just, it doesn't, you have to be true to yourself. And I just think that's what Zach is. I think he's a decent person. Who's not going to be fire and brimstone coach. Not every coach. I know that's what fans want out of every coach, right? They want fire and brimstone coach. That's what they want. These guys aren't trying hard enough. They don't have passion. They fell flat. It's all a bunch of hogwash. But yeah, I said on the interview today, I said Mike Tomlin came up with what we thought Mike Tomlin's like. John Harbaugh came up with what we thought John Harbaugh's like, and then Kevin Stefanski and Zach Taylor came off as guys grasping at straws with their team struggling.
Yeah, and I didn't even think of it so much as like, oh, the Bengals are struggling and Zach Taylor doesn't know what he's doing or anything like that. It had nothing to do with the actual content of what he's saying. It's just that Andy Dalton clip that we always bring up where he's leading the team out of the tunnel there and he's giving his pregame speech like, all right, we fought hard all week, guys. Oh, go out, play hard, 3, ready, 1, 2, 3, play hard. Everyone's like, okay, play hard.
We got you. Yep.
Thanks, Andy. That's kind of like the vibe of Zach Taylor. It's like the things he's saying sound like the things all the other coaches are saying. And he's doing it in a way that seems authentic to him. It doesn't seem like he's trying too hard or trying to be something he's not. And yet, I don't know if it's just the way his voice sounds, the way he comes off or whatever. there's something about it that doesn't quite have that oomph of another guy. And Mike Tomlin is hard to compare him to like this on the show because Mike Tomlin really has that presence. Obviously,
Yes.
he has that cool factor to him. But I'm with you. You don't have to have that. You don't have to be a certain type of personality to be successful. But I also think just watching this, it's definitely striking watching the difference.
There's no question
in who Zach is.
Yeah, there's no question that part. I knew that was going to be talked about among fans today because again, every fan wants fire and brimstone guy coming in there, gritting your teeth, get him to run through a wall for you, running out for practice. That's not how he is. He's a very clinical coach that I think is big on the preparation aspect of it and not the fire and brimstone aspect of it.
But that's what's cool about Mike Tomlin, though, right? Because he's not really a fire and brimstone guy, I wouldn't say. I don't see him out there ranting and raving and hollering and getting in his guys' faces. He seems more like a player coach.
Yeah.
But when he says the authoritative things, they seem real. They carry some weight.
You know what scene cracked me up the most? I don't know why it did.
Cheetos? The free?
Absolutely.
How did they do that scene?
I don't know.
Eating too much? What was that?
That's funny you guessed that because I'm like, oh, he's eating like a bag of barbecue Fritos. Fritos, yes. With his feet up on the desk watching film. I'm like, that was actually, I don't know why I love that scene, but I love that scene, but it was also weird.
Whoever was editing that is just like you and me. They saw that footage and they go, I just love that. I don't know why, but I have to put that in. It was a gratuitous shot. It was like, some of these shots are quick little snippets. And this shot they stick on for 12 seconds of him unwrapping opening up the bag of Fritos, sticking his hand in it, the ruffle of it, and then him propping his feet up and taking a bite of them. Of 12 seconds spent on that. It was hilarious. I had no idea why they put that in.
And then the other one was the Jameis Winston having to repeat the play call and then, mimic that he was going up to the line of scrimmage to call it. And then in his bare feet, taking his drop back.
Do you think that's a common theme that all quarterbacks do throughout the week? Or is that like a specific to Cleveland and Jameis thing right now?
No, I think it's just repeating play calls just to make sure you have it. Yeah.
But I saw people tweeting about that, like as if Jameis was having to do that because he's Jameis or something. I'm like, that feels like a pretty standard thing you would do throughout the week is just get comfortable with, hey, here's the play call. You got to recite it all. And then remember muscle memory. Here's what I'm going to do when I make that play call.
Yeah. The Bengals used to have a kind of a Jeopardy game that they would play with the quarterbacks.
I remember that.
And they would kind of play it as a game to recite the plays back. It's just to make sure that, when a play call goes in your helmet, you're not going, what did he just say to me? And what do I got to spit back out? It's routine.
Yeah. I also love that moment, the first play of that Bengals Steelers game where the pass gets picked off. And he puts his arm around his receiver and he's just like, hey, that's not going to define this game. Because you saw it on the broadcast. You're going, I wonder what that conversation is right now. And then you get to hear what it really was like. And it's like, man,
it also
like that guy.
Yeah, it also shows you, because of course he called out George Pickens after the game. It also showed you that he knows how fragile that dude's ego is. Oh my word! I mean, you could see it right in that moment. That
hang with me, man. The rest of the game.
Exactly.
Yeah, that was a good scene. And I thought again, Mike Tomlin was the star. That was probably the most fun part. Was just kind of watching him interact with this guy. Some of the little sayings that he used. Was there anything else that stuck out to you from a Bengals perspective?
No, Jonah Williams didn't come off as looking very good in the film that they flipped back to.
That was a hilarious moment too.
Dude, so when we're watching it, as soon as he kind of mentioned that, literally right as it's getting ready to go from the talking to where you see the clip, I go, oh no, Jonah, and there he was. I'm like, oh gosh, I remember this. This is not going to end well. This is not going to go well.
Essentially, this was the Steelers preparing their guys for the matchup against Orlando Brown Jr. And they prefaced it by saying, here's why they have Orlando Brown Jr. And they showed the clips of Jonah just getting worked over in that game.
Yeah, and you could also see, and I know it was. I mean, I even asked a question about it on Monday. I mean, there was no question as that game went on, Orlando was just hurting, and you could see that the Herbig kid took full advantage of it. I mean, he couldn't even get out of his stance.
Yeah. And they were calling that one from the sideline. It's like someone saying it as it happens. And there are some fun moments from those Hard Knocks things from the games where you're able to see like, oh, I watched this on TV.
Right.
Now I get kind of a sideline angle of what was being said during that. That's probably my favorite parts of these. But other than that, I thought they were really cool when they first started to come out. The first couple seasons I saw Hard Knocks. Now at this point, I got to be honest, it feels like a lot of repetition. It feels like the same thing over and over. And people get so excited for it.
Yeah, I'm glad I watched the first episode. Like I said, I mean, I can imagine that from here on out, it's going to be very Baltimore and Pittsburgh centric as it should be. I mean, they're the two teams that are left in the playoff race. I mean, I'm sure they'll gratuitously show a little Bengals here and there. And so I don't need to watch.
Yep. All right, let's switch gears back to the Bengals here. And I guess how much, Skinny, does the rest of this season matter in terms of the decisions they might make as it relates to players, as it relates to personnel, coaching staff? What are we watching for right now? Does it matter the record they finish with? If they do well, is that going to save some people's jobs, so to speak? Or
Well, and that's always a fear, right? I mean, Tyler Boyd catching a touchdown pass in Baltimore the one year basically gave Marvin Lewis another year. And it was like, that felt like that was going to be the end of it. And instead they get a miracle finish and they bring him back another year. So I would hope that decisions that you're going to make are not going to be based on if this team wins its final 5 games, unless those final 5 games get into the playoffs. I do think I don't think you make sweeping personnel changes until you're mathematically eliminated. This question came up. Tony asked me kind of something similar. But what do you do with Joe Burrow and Jamar Chase in week 16 or week 17 or week 18 when you're mathematically eliminated? Are you really going to run the risk of running Joe Burrow out with the guaranteed money there that he suffers maybe an injury that carries into next season in a meaningless game? I think you have to make those tough decisions. I think, once you're mathematically eliminated, throw all the kids out there that you can throw out. Let's see what you got. See who can play and who can't. As you know, Rick, I'm sure you've seen this as a reporter, as an analyst who goes to basketball practices, as somebody that in high school, played stuff. There are some guys that right or wrong aren't good practice players that are great in games, and vice versa. Those guys are great practice players who are terrible in games. I mean, maybe you need to see some of that down the stretch, and so I think those are the things you have to do. Again, but I don't think you do anything until you're mathematically eliminated. And that's probably the fair thing to do.
yeah, and I mean, I don't think you're expecting any type of big changes during the season at all, are you? Do you think they will? Is so drastic as to like fire a coach or something during the season?
No, I mean, honestly, for those that want Lou fired, and I'm not in that camp, but those that want it, if there was a line of them drawing a line in the sand, it might have been this past game against Pittsburgh. But I think you're so late into it that you're going to let it play all out and sit down and make a full evaluation. I just don't know. At this point of firing, what does it really serve? I mean, it's not something that you're going to go, hey, we're only a game or two out of this, and if we can just make this little change here, we're going to get back into it.
Right.
No, you're either completely dissatisfied with somebody, as Chicago should be with Matt Eberflus for the buffoonery on Thanksgiving Day, and obviously the stuff that piled up before that was like the final straw. But I just don't see anything like that taking place until the season ends.
I'm with you on that. I can't see it, and I don't think it makes a lot of sense. But at the same time, I would say I want them to make the decision now. I want them to have the decision, their minds made up on certain guys, whether that's keeping them or getting rid of them or what have you, building around certain guys. All of that stuff needs to be made up now when they've played these games that matter. I don't want them to be like the next 5 games are going to decide who sticks around or not, because we've seen that already. Once the season's over and it doesn't really matter and the games are meaningless, it doesn't matter what you do at that point, really. These next few games are mostly meaningless in terms of the Bengals competing or basing what you should do in the future around that stuff. I don't want them to, I mean, I know I'm basically saying the rest of the season is a lame duck season, but that's what I want it to be. I don't want them to be making decisions based on these last several games. And on the point you made about potentially sitting out a guy like a Joe Burrow or a Jamar Chase late in the year, I would say definitely. I mean, you get to week 16, week 17, it's not a hard choice from the Bengals at all. You definitely want to sit those guys. But on the flip side, I guess my other question for you is, how much do players care about playing for stats? Because I think a lot of people...
Well, that's what it would come down to.
Yeah, these guys are all going to want to sit out now for the rest of the season. But I would argue that, for a lot of these guys, still their legacy, the records they're chasing, their future contracts are all based off of the stats they're putting up. So they might not want to sit out.
Oh, I don't think if it was stats related or not, I don't think Joe Burrow is a guy that would want to sit out no matter what it was. But right now he leads the NFL in completions, attempts, yards, touchdowns. I mean, you could argue those things matter, but I hate to say it that you have to look at through a different prism if you're management and the coaching staff of, we're paying you guaranteed money. If you suffer a catastrophic injury, we're on the hook for that guaranteed money. These are meaningless games. We don't play you in meaningless games in August because we want you to get to the season healthy. Well, guess what now? I want you to get to next season healthy. And so I'm not running this risk factor. I'm just not going to do it. The risk reward is not there. And I'm sorry if it cost you a passing title. You're already paid like you've won 1 billion passing titles. So you just have to live with that.
Yeah, that's an interesting conversation because I keep hearing it from the other side of like, are the Bengals players, is the Bengals management and coaches going to be able to keep the players on the field? Are they going to start making quote unquote business
And
decisions
some might.
sitting out?
And some might.
Well, they might, but that wouldn't be my real concern. My bigger concern would be, because if they sit out, who cares? The Bengals are already out of it. It doesn't matter. But from a fan's perspective, my bigger concern is that, maybe Joe Burrow does play the rest of the season because he wants to chase these passing titles and the numbers that he's putting up. And I wouldn't blame him. He's having an incredible season. But to your point, then you potentially run the risk of letting Joe Burrow take more hits and get injured before next season and potentially set you back for next year. So I think that's something somewhat interesting to watch as we go forward in a season where I don't think there's much interesting left to watch. Personally,
There's not.
This is going to be tough to get through these final several weeks, especially doing a podcast about them. The fan base is certain that they're moving on from someone, whether it's Zach Taylor, whether it's Lou Anarumo, whether it's blowing the whole thing up and just restarting from ground zero. How certain are you that a major decision will be made?
Not at the Zach Taylor level, and I don't even think at the Lou level, to be honest with you. I think it's a position coach or two that likely is the sacrificial lamb. I mean, I think the full nuclear option would be them relieving Lou of his duties and getting another voice. And maybe it's time for another voice. All I can tell you is this. I wrote a column today that kind of touched on this. Do this exercise, Rick. Just do this little exercise for me. Give me a list of players on the defensive unit heading into next year that you'd like to be on this roster to build around.
I mean, Trey Hendrickson is one. I mean, is there another one that you would even say?
I'd bring Logan Wilson back because he's still a very serviceable player.
Fine, but he fell off the map in a hard way this year.
I mean, the young tackles because they're young. I still
There's
think
a player in the secondary that I would keep.
Yeah, I mean, the only one I'm looking at would be Dax Hill coming back off of injury and determining where you want to put him position wise. And I still think Cam Taylor-Britt's going to be a good corner. He just needs to wash this season out of his memory bank. But again, if I'm making a list of bringing guys back definitively, he's not definitive. I mean, he's going to be back because he's under a rookie contract and you got to fill a roster out.
But none of these guys are building blocks.
That goes back to the point of, again, you can point the finger at Lou. That's fine. And he took responsibility on Monday. He pointed the finger inward. He said, it's up to me to get the most out of these guys. And I give him credit for that. I mean, some coaches roll guys under buses. I give him exact credit. They both pointed the finger inward at themselves. And I think it's admirable. But at the same time, if you think he's the problem, then is this new guy, whoever comes in, if he's got those same building blocks, how do you think that guy's going to do?
Yeah, and I that's why, as we've talked about this, I continuously go back to Duke Tobin first and foremost. If you're going to stand pat with everything, then fair enough. That is what it is. But if you're going to start making major changes, I think you got to start with the guy who's bringing in the players who's most responsible for that. And as far as I know, that's Duke Tobin. Maybe there's some other stuff going on that I don't know about, and someone else should be held more responsible for some of these player personnel decisions than Duke Tobin. But he's the front-facing figure right now as far as it comes to the GM role or putting this roster together. So I would start with him personally because I don't think Lou Anarumo had a capable defense to work with this year. Now, that doesn't mean you can't also look in a new direction.
Sure.
With the defensive coordinator, maybe just decide we want a whole new direction with this. That would also be fine with me based on the way things went. Yeah, I understand that. Start with personnel.
I agree with that. And I think that's exactly right. And yeah, to your point, maybe it is time for a new voice, a new direction, a new style, for lack of a better term. I mean, maybe a more aggressive defensive coordinator is what you need. Maybe a less aggressive defensive coordinator is what you need. Maybe a guy who, I brought this up on the interview today. And I asked Lou about the end play, the Josh Fields run at the end of the game. I said, I'm guessing you guys rep that a bunch during the week. How does that happen? How does nobody have outside contain there? And he said, just a young guy, meaning Josh Newton, just trying to make a play. And he goes, I have full faith next time he'll make the right play. And he said, him and Jordan Battle are supposed to have outside contain, and they just both tried to make a play. Well, is that a coaching issue? If you rep it that many times and you've told them when Justin Fields comes in the game, one of two things is happening. He's going to hand it off on the read option, or he's going to pull it and run. You guys who have outside contain, you know what you're supposed to do. You guys on the inside have your responsibilities, play your assignment football. And when the main two guys on the outside don't play their assignment, whose fault is that?
I'm totally with you that the players have to show up. The players have to make the plays. But at a certain point, as the coach, you are also just held responsible for the end product. And if continuously your guys just will not execute the game plan that they're giving them, then that is also on you, even if it's not fair. And it might be just that you don't have good enough personnel. But at that point, I think everything just needs to be worked over. And again, I'm not saying that's the situation the Bengals are in. I truly don't know. It certainly looks that way right now. Right now, it looks like everything should be blown up and they should do something completely different defensively. But to your point originally, I still go back to this defense never really had a chance when you look at the personnel. I mean,
Correct.
You know, my buddy Dan made a good point. He was texting me about the Lou Anarumo talking to you guys, and he said, Anarumo saying it begins and ends with me, and then in the next breath saying, you know, he was taken up for Geno Stone essentially and his missed tackles. That's the behavior of a guy who's not worried about losing his job, quite frankly. It seems like a guy who's pretty confident that he's going to be back. So, yeah, I don't get the sense that they're moving on from Lou Anarumo.
Yeah, I think that's the highest it would go. For those that are maybe wanting and wishing Zach to be gone, I don't see you moving on from a coach 2 years after you go to a run of AFC Championship Super Bowl. You can argue that
it's the Bengals.
Right. That's right. That's an even better point.
Yeah, there are other franchises who would look at that and say, okay, we got to move on. We got to do better than this. But the Bengals, I don't think feel that way. And honestly, I don't know that they should feel that way. I know it sucks to say that. I know fans don't want to hear it. We all think they should be in the Super Bowl next year, and they're capable of that because they had a couple of good years or whatever, and Joe Burrow is their quarterback. But the reality is this franchise has absolutely sucked my entire life, aside from a few years that Zach Taylor was the head coach. So I don't really know that you can go out there and say, yeah, they're definitely going to do better if they get rid of Zach Taylor.
Ryan Day.
Oh, we're going to talk about that.
Oh, I know we are.
Going back, actually, Dan asked this question. It was asking you anything, but we're kind of talking about all this stuff right now. So let's address it. Did Zach Taylor ever actually create a quote unquote good culture in the Bengals locker room? Or was the team just really successful with charismatic locker room leaders for 2 years? I realize he contributed to that.
I do, because I do and I don't. I think he knew who the leaders were to identify. And unfortunately, 3 of those guys, 2 of whom played on some crappy teams, but 3 guys in particular, I think really held the locker room together in bad times. Tyler Boyd, DJ Reader, Jesse Bates. I believe those 3 guys. And I know everybody's making a big deal of, DJ had a sack on Thanksgiving Day. DJ hasn't played all that great in Detroit. He's played some, and again, I don't think they thought he was going to be healthy enough to pay him. And you have to understand some of that goes into it. It can't just be, DJ Reader. You didn't know DJ Reader was going to be the DJ Reader he was, because he's really not. But that said, I think you've lost some stuff with that. And, right now, the cores of the locker room where you would look for leaders, I don't see a ton of them. I know Jermaine Pratt's a captain, but he didn't exactly take full responsibility for the buffoonery that took place in tackling on Sunday, did he? I mean, shouldn't a leader there go, we got to be better? We not say what missed tackles. It was screen game, quick game. I mean, it was one of.
I feel like there was no issues there, especially when he was personally responsible for a lot of them.
And that's why you're captains.
That would tell me that guy's got to go immediately. And then, quite honestly, he's been so inconsistent throughout his entire career. Done with him anyway.
I think Mon Bell's very much a leader, but it's hard to be a leader then when you get benched, right? And it's time
good.
It was time to bench him. I thought Ted Karras was a leader on the offensive line, and I think he's actually put a little division in that locker room with this whole take it outside nonsense. Where on Monday, a couple of cluster interviews with multiple reporters were done in the locker room. In fact, he got up at one point, because I was watching one of the interviews with somebody I didn't need to talk to, and he shook his head in disgust and went back to his locker, grabbed his stuff, and left. I'm like, dude, are you really worried about that when you're 4-8, my guy?
Wait, so what's his issue? He wants interviews to be done outside?
Oh yeah, I bet you'd heard about all this.
No, I'm unaware of Ted Karras.
Yeah, this is an NFL PA thing.
I was only aware he was selling hats.
No,
that's all he did.
No, teams are trying to get the media to be out of the locker room, and so this was one of their early initiatives of when you go up to interview a player, it's up to them to tell you they want to go outside. But kind of there was a push in the Bengals locker room of do it, and little by little, more and more veterans are just saying, "To hell with this! I'm just going to stay in my locker and talk to you guys." The one day about a month ago, I walked up to Evan McPherson and I said, "Hey man, you got a second?" This is before his most recent issues. This was when he was having issues earlier. He's a good kid. And I started to ask my first question. He starts to answer it. And all of a sudden he stops and kind of rolls his eyes. And I turn over my shoulder, and Ted, literally like a father, is pointing to the door like, "You got to go outside with this." I'm like, give me a freaking break.
What a loser.
Clown show.
Yeah, I did not know that was going on. So that's it. Does any of the culture stuff matter? Like the Club Med preseason, ping pong tables, any of this stuff?
I'll tell you what, I shouldn't be appalled at this, because I do realize that this is their job. I will say this, and I've said this before, Rip. I think fans take winning and losing far more personal than players do. For players, it's a job.
Yeah.
They're getting paid to do the job. They're trying to put their best foot forward in order to get more money to do their job. So that's the motivation for them. Winning is a byproduct, and nobody likes to lose. But again, at the end of the day, I mean, dude, if you'd have been in that locker room on Monday with the ping pong going on and the raucousness, you thought this was a 9-3 football team about to clinch a playoff berth. It was the damnedest thing I've ever seen.
Well, one thing you got to remember that people don't realize, because fans get, they're in turmoil when their team's not playing well and everything's the worst. But for a lot of these guys, have you ever had a job where the stakes weren't that high? There wasn't a lot of pressure. You kind of just went in, you hung out with your buddies, you kind of got your job done, you just went home and you just had a good time. That's a good job to work. People usually like working those jobs. You may not make the most money at them, but in the NFL, you're making millions to do that. So, I mean, yeah, they're living a less stressful life now that they're out of the playoff picture in a lot of ways. That's how it goes for NFL teams. It may suck, it may be frustrating, but at the end of the day, your day-to-day life isn't ruined by it.
Right.
One other little bit of news here from the Bengals. Veteran wide receiver Trenton Irwin was waived by the Bengals this week. He spent 6 years with the team, which actually was longer than it felt like, at least to me. I didn't realize he had been there that long. They did sign linebacker Shaka Hayward up from the practice squad. Trenton Irwin played in his 6 years. He played 41 games. He had 46 receptions, 601 yards, and 5 touchdowns. I was driving back from Akron last night. I asked the two people in the car with me to guess how many receptions and yards he had. And both of them missed the yardage by like over 400 yards. They thought he had about 200 or 300 yards. So
that's funny.
I don't know where I'm going with this. I just thought it was kind of interesting that they waived Trenton Irwin and he had better stats than I originally
Yeah, no, I mean, Trenton Irwin, you talk about a guy squeezing the absolute most out of a career. I mean, he did it tenfold. You're probably too young for this. You remember the movie Office Space?
Oh, yeah.
Remember Melvin that kept getting moved down the line and finally they put him in the basement?
Yes.
That feels like Trenton. Like they never told Trenton he was fired, so he just kept showing up like, yeah, I mean, he's still on the roster. I mean, yeah, okay, sure.
And what's funny about that is he had some type of quote. He got waived, by the way, but he had a quote in his goodbye to Cincinnati that was something like, when people no longer see you as you see yourself, it's time to leave. And it's like, okay, I guess so, buddy.
I got to give him this. He would, so after like a training camp practice, you go in, do the locker room stuff, and I would have to come out and do usually a TV hit, but about 45 minutes would have passed since the end of practice by that point. And who's still out there signing autographs every day? Trenton Irwin, every day. He loved that.
And then as he'd turn and go back to the locker room, you'd hear the kids ask their mom, who was that?
Yeah, right. Exactly. Yeah, exactly.